"Please, not again," she pleaded. The rancher looked and was speechless. He looked over the fields, feeling a quiet sense of pride and peace. His ranch had been in his family for generations, and every fence post, every patch of soil told a story of hard work and dedication. Jacob was a man used to routine, to the quiet rhythm of life on the land, where every day was measured by the sun, the weather, and the animals that depended on him. The sound of hooves in the distance made him glance up. A figure was approaching, running down the dirt path that led to the ranch. It was unusual for anyone to be out here this early, and Jacob's brow furrowed. As the figure got closer, he could see it was a young woman, her hair tied loosely, her clothes slightly disheveled, as if she had rushed through the fields without care for how she looked. There was urgency in her movements, a kind of desperation that made Jacob feel uneasy. By the time she reached the porch, she was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling quickly. Her eyes, wide and glistening with worry, met Jacob's. "Please, not again," she said, her voice trembling. There was a crack in it, a mix of fear and pleading that made Jacob freeze for a moment. He was used to dealing with problems, to managing livestock, fixing broken fences, and weathering storms, but this was different. This was human fear, raw and urgent. Jacob stepped down from the porch slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Emma?" he asked cautiously, his voice steady, though his mind raced. It had been years since he had last seen her. She had grown into a strong young woman, but the worry etched on her face told him something serious had happened, or was about to happen. Emma's hands trembled as she reached for the railing. "Jacob, you have to listen," she said. Her voice cracked again, but she tried to steady it. I can't let it happen again, please." She looked around as if the threat could come from anywhere, and Jacob followed her gaze, but the ranch was quiet. The field stretched out under the early sun, animals grazing calmly, birds singing in the distance. There was nothing here yet. Jacob felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen storms, fires, and accidents on this land, but Emma's fear was something he couldn't measure with experience alone. It was a feeling that told him something was wrong, something beyond the normal dangers of ranch life. He wanted to ask questions, to understand, but he also knew that panic could make people say things they didn't fully mean. "Sit for a moment," Jacob finally said, motioning to the porch swing. Emma hesitated, then sank onto it, her shoulders hunched as if carrying the weight of the world. Jacob stood nearby, unsure of what to do first. He had a sense of responsibility toward her, though he wasn't sure why. There had been history between their families, connections that were complicated, filled with both fond memories and old wounds. Emma took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but her eyes kept darting toward the horizon. "You don't understand," she said softly. It's happening again, just like before. And if we don't do something, everything could be lost." She clenched her fists, pressing them against her knees. Jacob noticed how small she looked, yet how fierce the determination in her eyes was. She was not just afraid, she was determined to prevent a disaster she had already lived through once. Jacob sank onto the swing beside her, careful to leave space, but close enough to offer comfort. "Emma, slow down. Tell me what's going on," he said gently. He needed to know what kind of danger they were facing. He had dealt with fires, floods, and storms, yes, but human pain, human fear, it was unpredictable. He could handle nature, but this, he didn't yet know if he could handle this. Emma's hands shook as she clasped them together. "It's the land, the ranch, the water," she began, her voice almost a whisper. "Years ago, my family, we lost everything because of a flood. The river swelled, the fences broke, and our home, it was destroyed. And back then, I thought we had learned the lesson, but now it's happening again. And this time, I can't bear to watch it happen to anyone else." Her voice cracked, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Jacob felt his chest tighten. Memories of that time, of losses he had witnessed, came rushing back. He remembered the swollen river, the frantic animals, and the despair in people's eyes as they tried to save what little they could. He had done what he could, but even he had felt powerless. And now, seeing Emma relive that fear, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him once more. He put a hand gently on her shoulder. "Emma, you're not alone. We'll face this together," he said, his voice firm, trying to reassure her, though he wasn't entirely sure what they were facing. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. What's happening now?" Her words came fast, a mix of fear and urgency, as she described how she had tried to warn the local authorities, how she had come to the ranch because she knew Jacob would understand the stakes. Jacob listened, absorbing every detail. His mind worked quickly, assessing the situation. He could see the truth in her eyes. This was not a false alarm. The river was rising, and if it overflowed, the ranch and the surrounding lands could be in serious danger. He felt a surge of determination. He had faced storms before, but this time it was personal. This time he couldn't just follow the usual routine. He had to act, and he had to act fast. Emma's fear was palpable, but there was also hope in her eyes. She believed in him, in his experience and his ability to make a difference. Jacob took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, and realized that this was more than just a natural threat. It was a chance to make things right, to prevent history from repeating itself, and to protect the people and land he cared about. The sun continued to rise, casting long shadows across the fields. The animals grazed peacefully, unaware of the impending danger, and the wind whispered through the trees. Jacob stood, looking toward the horizon where the river ran, a determined expression on his face. He knew that every decision he made in the coming hours could change the outcome. And for the first time in a long while, he felt the full responsibility of the land, of the people, and of the trust that had been placed in him. Emma watched him, a mix of fear and relief on her face. She knew that Jacob's presence meant they had a chance, a real chance to face the challenge ahead. She didn't yet know how they would succeed, but she trusted him. And in that quiet moment, with the sun climbing higher and the air filled with both tension and hope, the two of them prepared to face whatever came next together. The ranch, silent and beautiful, seemed almost to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. And as Jacob took the first steps toward preparing the land, securing the fences and checking the water levels, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to protect not just the land, but the people who depended on it. Emma followed him, her fear now tempered with determination. She was no longer just a witness to history repeating itself. She was a participant, ready to help, ready to act, and ready to face the challenges ahead. And in that moment, with the wind in their hair and the sun warming their faces, the quiet of the morning was broken only by the sound of their footsteps, moving together toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The morning had fully broken, and the sun shone brightly over the ranch. Birds chirped in the trees, and the distant hum of insects filled the air. But beneath the calm surface, tension lingered like a heavy cloud. Jacob and Emma moved quickly, checking the fences along the riverbank. Every plank, every post, had to be strong enough to withstand the rising water. Emma's eyes scanned the horizon constantly, searching for any sign that the danger was approaching faster than they expected. As they worked, Emma began to speak more about the past. "Jacob, do you remember what happened years ago?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. He nodded slowly. He remembered too well. That flood had been sudden, relentless, and cruel. Families had lost everything. Livestock had drowned, fields had been ruined, and he had stood there helpless, watching the water sweep away the lives of people he cared about. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I can't go through that again. I can't. My family, we lost so much. And the thought of anyone else losing what they've worked for, it's unbearable." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I thought I was strong enough to forget it, but I can't. That fear, it's still here. And now I see the signs, and I know it's coming back. We'll do everything we can to make sure this doesn't happen again." His voice was steady, but inside he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Every decision mattered. One mistake could cost lives, property, or even more. They continued to walk along the riverbank, inspecting the levees. The water was higher than it should have been for this time of year, and small cracks were beginning to show. Jacob's heart sank. He had seen rivers swell before, but this was different. The current was strong, and the soil along the edge of the river was soft, vulnerable. If the levees broke, the ranch could be flooded in a matter of hours. Emma knelt down and pressed her hand against the wet earth. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the cracks forming along the bank. "It's like it's already starting. We can't wait any longer." Her voice was tense, urgent. Jacob nodded, knowing she was right. Every moment they delayed increased the risk. They gathered tools, sandbags, and whatever materials they could find to reinforce the banks. Jacob worked with precision, setting posts, stacking sandbags, and securing the weak points. Emma followed his instructions, learning quickly. Despite her fear, there was determination in her movements, a resolve that inspired Jacob. She wasn't just helping. She was standing up to history, facing a danger she had experienced before and refusing to let it control her. As they worked, Emma shared more of her memories. "The first time it happened, my parents were so scared. We had barely saved the animals and our home, it was gone. I thought we would lose everything. And I promised myself that I would never let it happen again, not to anyone else, not here, not anywhere." Her voice trembled with emotion, but she continued, driven by the need to act to prevent another disaster. Jacob listened, silently acknowledging her pain. He remembered those days too, how hopeless it had felt, how strong people had to be just to survive. But now together they had a chance to make a difference. They weren't powerless anymore. They could prepare, strengthen, and protect. And he could see that Emma's fear was turning into courage, the kind of courage that pushed people to act when others might panic. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, making the work even harder. Sweat ran down their faces and their muscles ached, but neither of them slowed. Every sandbag they placed, every weak post they reinforced, brought a small measure of relief. The river still rose slowly, but they could see the difference their efforts were making. During a brief pause, Jacob and Emma sat on a fallen log, catching their breath. The wind carried a cool breeze, and the sound of the river rushing reminded them of the stakes. Emma turned to Jacob, her eyes serious. "Do you think it's possible to stop it completely?" she asked. Jacob thought for a moment. "We can't control everything," he said honestly. "Nature has its own way, and sometimes it's stronger than we are. But we can do everything in our power to reduce the damage. That's all anyone can do." His words were calm, but his mind raced with possibilities. He thought of extra reinforcements, checking the animals, making sure everyone on the ranch knew what to do if the worst happened. Emma nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She didn't want to hope too much. She had been disappointed before, but she also didn't want to give up. "Then let's do it," she said firmly. "We can't wait, we have to act now." Jacob's experience guided them, and Emma's determination pushed them forward. Together, they created a plan, anticipating what could go wrong and preparing for it. Every detail mattered: the gates, the fences, the water channels. They thought of everything. As evening approached, the sky darkened slightly with clouds gathering in the distance. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and carrying a sense of urgency. Jacob looked at Emma and saw the worry in her eyes, but he also saw strength. She had faced fear before, and she was facing it again, refusing to let it dominate her. "Emma," he said, "you've done well today. You've worked hard and you've thought through everything. The river may still rise, but we're ready for it. We've done everything we can." Night fell over the ranch, and the stars began to twinkle in the clear sky. The river reflected the moonlight, glimmering with quiet menace. Jacob and Emma stood together on the porch of the ranch house, looking out over the land they had worked so hard to protect. They were exhausted, but there was a sense of accomplishment in their efforts. They had prepared as best they could, and while the outcome was uncertain, they had faced the challenge with courage and determination. Emma leaned against the railing, her mind replaying memories of the past floods. She thought of her family, of the fear they had felt, of the lessons learned through loss. And now, standing here with Jacob, she felt a new sense of hope. They were not alone, and they had taken action. The ranch, the animals, and the people depending on them had a chance. Jacob, too, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had faced storms and disasters before, but this was different. This was personal. Helping Emma prevent a tragedy that could repeat history gave him a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that protecting the land was not just about fences and water. It was about people, about relationships, about the trust placed in him. The night deepened, and the ranch grew quiet except for the gentle murmur of the river. Emma finally sat down fully on the porch swing, exhausted but relieved. Jacob stood beside her, looking at the stars, thinking about the day's work, the challenges ahead, and the lessons learned. Both of them understood that the fight was far from over, but they had taken the first critical steps. As they prepared for the night, Jacob reflected on the importance of vigilance, planning, and teamwork. Emma, meanwhile, felt the mix of fear and hope that had guided her all day. She knew the river might still rise, but she also knew that they had done everything in their power to prevent disaster. And in that knowledge, there was a sense of strength, of resilience, and of determination that would carry them through whatever came next. The ranch rested under the calm night sky, but the river continued its slow rise, a reminder that nature was powerful and unpredictable. Jacob and Emma, though weary, were ready. They had faced the past, confronted fear, and prepared for the challenge ahead. And as they watched the stars twinkle above the land they loved, both of them knew that this was only the beginning of a test of courage, resilience, and hope. The first light of dawn broke over the ranch, casting a soft golden glow across the fields. The air smelled damp, and the distant roar of the river reminded Jacob and Emma that the danger was still very real. The work of the previous day had strengthened the levees, secured the animals, and prepared the ranch as best they could, but they both knew that nature was unpredictable. Every second mattered, and the tension in the air was thick enough to touch. Jacob checked the river again, noting the increased current and the swollen banks. The water was creeping closer to the fences, and small waves splashed against the wooden posts. He turned to Emma, who was already moving quickly, checking the animals in the pens. "It's rising faster than I thought," he said, his voice steady but low. He didn't want to alarm her, but he couldn't hide the truth. Emma glanced up from the pen she was checking, her face set in determination. "Then we have to work faster. We can't wait for it to get worse," she replied. Her hands moved confidently as she secured the gates and made sure each animal had enough food and water. Despite her fear, there was no hesitation in her actions. She had learned from the past, and now her fear had become fuel, a reason to act rather than to freeze. Together, they moved along the riverbank, reinforcing weak spots and adding more sandbags wherever the water seemed strongest. Jacob coordinated their efforts with precision. He instructed Emma on where to place the heaviest bags, how to tie the posts more securely, and how to redirect small channels of water that threatened to overflow. Emma followed his directions, but she also thought ahead, spotting areas he hadn't considered. Her instincts, sharpened by past experience, complemented Jacob's knowledge perfectly. As they worked, the clouds above darkened, signaling an approaching storm. The wind picked up, rustling the trees and sending leaves swirling across the field. The first drops of rain began to fall, light at first but steady and insistent. Jacob looked at Emma, noting the set of her jaw and the focus in her eyes. She wasn't giving up. She couldn't. And he realized that neither could he. Suddenly, a loud snap echoed across the ranch. One of the older trees near the riverbank had given way under the weight of the wind and rain. The tree fell with a crash, narrowly missing the fence and sending a small shower of dirt and water into the air. Emma jumped back, startled, but quickly regained her composure. "That was close," she said, breathing heavily. "We have to be even more careful. Nature isn't waiting for us. Every second counts." He gestured toward a particularly weak section of the levee where water was seeping through. "That's our priority. We need to reinforce it before it gives way completely." Sweat and rain mixed on their faces, and their clothes were soaked through, but neither stopped. Every movement, every sandbag, every post secured was a small victory against the rising threat. Hours passed, and the river continued to climb. The storm intensified, sending sheets of rain down on the ranch. The wind howled, whipping through the fields and bending the trees almost to the ground. Jacob and Emma were soaked, shivering, but their focus never wavered. They moved together like a single unit, each anticipating the other's actions, each protecting the land and the animals as if their lives depended on it, which, in a way, they did. Suddenly, a loud roar came from the river. A section of the levee had begun to give way. Water started to pour through the weak spot, threatening to flood the lower fields. Jacob's heart raced. "Emma, we need more sandbags, now," he shouted over the wind. Emma sprinted to the pile of bags they had prepared, dragging them one by one to the breach. Jacob worked alongside her, pressing the bags into place, reinforcing them with stakes and rope. The water was relentless, and every moment it poured through felt like a battle they were barely holding. But they didn't stop. They refused to let fear control them. At one point, Emma slipped on the wet ground, nearly falling into the rushing water. Jacob's hand shot out, grabbing hers just in time. "Careful," he yelled, his voice a mixture of alarm and relief. She nodded, shaking off the shock, and continued. Her hands were numb, her muscles aching, but she didn't give up. She couldn't. Not now. Not after everything she had survived. The storm raged on, and the river showed no sign of slowing. Trees creaked and groaned under the wind, and mudslides threatened some of the lower fields. Jacob and Emma moved constantly, reinforcing fences, redirecting water, and checking on the animals. Every decision was critical. Every mistake could mean disaster. Despite the danger, moments of quiet determination emerged. Jacob would pause to catch his breath and then guide Emma to a vulnerable spot. Emma would suggest solutions based on what she had seen in the past. Their teamwork was seamless, a combination of experience, instinct, and courage. Neither was willing to let the other carry the burden alone. At one point, the river's force nearly broke through a newly reinforced section. Jacob shouted for Emma to bring more bags. She ran through the rain, mud clinging to her boots, dragging the heavy sandbags to the breach. Together, they pressed the bags into place, tying them down and stacking them higher and higher. The water roared around them, but they stood firm, refusing to yield. Hours felt like minutes. Fatigue threatened to slow them, but the adrenaline, fear, and determination kept them moving. Rain poured down, drenching them to the bone. Cold and exhaustion gnawed at their muscles, but the thought of failure, of losing everything, pushed them onward. Every second mattered, and they were acutely aware of the stakes. Finally, as the storm began to weaken slightly and the river's rise slowed, Jacob and Emma stepped back, surveying their work. The levees were holding. The animals were safe. The ranch had survived the immediate threat. Both were soaked, shivering, and exhausted, but there was a quiet sense of victory. Emma sank to the ground, leaning against a fence post, her face streaked with mud and tears. "We did it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "We actually did it." "You were amazing today, Emma. Your courage, it made all the difference." His voice was filled with pride, but also with the quiet relief of someone who had faced danger and survived. For a few moments, they simply sat there, catching their breath, listening to the river as it slowly returned to a calmer flow. The storm was not entirely gone, but the worst had passed. They had faced the threat head-on and had prevented disaster. As the rain eased and the clouds began to break, a faint rainbow appeared on the horizon. It stretched across the sky, a symbol of hope and resilience. Emma looked at it, her eyes wide with wonder and relief. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Jacob smiled, though he was still soaked and tired. "It is. And it reminds us that even after the darkest storm, there's hope." She had faced the storm, protected the land, and prevented history from repeating itself. Jacob looked around at the ranch, at the fields, the animals, and the river that had nearly taken it all. He realized that the day had tested more than his skill as a rancher. It had tested his heart, his courage, and his ability to act when every second mattered. And he had learned something important too. Strength comes not only from experience but from the willingness to face fear, to work together, and to refuse to give up, no matter how impossible the challenge seemed. By the time night fell, the rain had stopped completely. The river had returned to its normal level, the wind had calmed, and the ranch lay under a quiet, starry sky. Jacob and Emma, exhausted but unbroken, finally allowed themselves to rest. They knew the land would need constant vigilance, that nature could be unpredictable, but for now they had won a critical battle. Emma lay on a blanket in the barn, her mind replaying every moment of the day, the fear, the adrenaline, the teamwork, the near misses, and finally the triumph. She thought of her family and the promise she had made to herself years ago, never again. Today she had kept that promise. Jacob sat outside the barn, staring at the stars, listening to the gentle sounds of the ranch settling after the storm. He thought about the lessons of the day, about courage, resilience, and the importance of acting decisively. Emma had reminded him that even when faced with fear, hope and determination could make all the difference. And as the night deepened over the quiet, recovering ranch, both Jacob and Emma drifted into a well-earned rest, knowing that while the storm had tested them, it had also shown them their strength, and that together they could face whatever came next. The next morning dawned calm and clear. The storm from the previous day was gone, leaving the ranch bathed in golden sunlight. The air was fresh, carrying the clean scent of rain-soaked earth and the soft hum of life returning to normal. Birds chirped cheerfully, insects buzzed through the fields, and the animals wandered safely around the ranch, unharmed. For the first time in many hours, Jacob and Emma could breathe fully, feeling the relief of having survived the danger together. Jacob walked slowly along the riverbank, inspecting the levees one last time. The water had receded to a safe level, and the reinforced sections held firm. Small patches of mud and debris reminded him of the storm's power, but he knew that their preparation and quick action had made all the difference. He glanced over at Emma, who was kneeling near the pens, gently feeding the animals that had been frightened by the previous day's events. Her face was calm, though traces of exhaustion remained. Emma looked up at him and smiled, a mix of relief and pride shining in her eyes. "We did it," she said softly. "Everything is safe, for now." Her voice carried the weight of the past, but also the promise of hope. Jacob nodded, understanding that while today had been a victory, life on the ranch would always carry its risks. The difference now was that they had faced danger together and come out stronger. They moved together across the fields, checking each section of the ranch for any lingering damage. The animals were calm, grazing peacefully, and the barns and fences were secure. Every step they took, every inspection they made, reinforced a sense of accomplishment and security. Jacob could feel the pride in Emma's movements, her confidence returning after hours of fear and uncertainty. She had faced a threat that had haunted her for years and had acted with courage and determination. As they worked, Emma began to speak about her memories of the past flood. "I remember the night everything was lost," she said quietly. "The water came so fast and we couldn't save anything. My parents, they tried so hard, but it wasn't enough. And I promised myself that if I ever saw something like that again, I would do whatever it took to stop it." Her voice trembled, but she continued, driven by the relief of knowing that today she had fulfilled that promise. Jacob listened, silently acknowledging her pain. He remembered those days too, the helplessness he had felt, and the moments when he had feared there was nothing he could do. But now, standing on the solid, safe ground of the ranch, he realized that action, courage, and preparation could change the outcome. He could see that Emma had learned this as well, that fear alone could not control life, but determination and effort could. By mid-morning, the ranch was calm and organized again. Jacob and Emma sat on the porch swing, sipping warm coffee from tin mugs, taking a moment to rest and reflect. The sunlight warmed their faces, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers from the nearby fields. They watched the river flow peacefully, a reminder of the storm that had tested them but also of the strength they had discovered in themselves. Emma turned to Jacob, her eyes thoughtful. "You know," she said, "I was so afraid yesterday. I thought history was going to repeat itself and there was nothing we could do, but we acted and it worked. We protected the land and the animals. And I think we learned something important about ourselves too. I'm proud of you." The weight of the past still lingered, but it no longer controlled her. She was stronger, braver, and more capable than she had realized. Jacob stood, stretching his tired muscles, and gestured toward the fields. "Let's finish the inspections," he said. "We need to make sure nothing is overlooked. Even though the worst is over, vigilance is important. Nature is unpredictable, and we can't afford to be careless." She had transformed through this experience, and he felt a quiet admiration for her resilience. As the day went on, neighbors began to appear, checking in on the ranch and its inhabitants. Word of the storm and the rising river had spread quickly, and people came to see if anyone needed help. Jacob and Emma explained what had happened, how they had prepared and reinforced the levees, and how the animals were safe. The neighbors were impressed by their teamwork and quick action, expressing gratitude and relief that no lives were lost and no property severely damaged. Emma felt a sense of connection with the community she hadn't realized she had missed. In the past, she had felt isolated, carrying her fears alone. But now, she understood that strength came not only from facing challenges individually, but also from relying on and working with others. She had acted courageously, but she had also accepted help when it was needed, and that balance gave her a deeper sense of security and belonging. As evening approached, the ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. The animals were fed and resting, the fences were secure, and the river flowed quietly, reflecting the colors of the sunset. Jacob and Emma sat on the porch, enjoying the calm after the storm. Emma turned to Jacob, her eyes filled with emotion. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me, for helping me, for being here. I couldn't have done it without you. Today, we didn't just protect the ranch, we learned something about ourselves too." As the stars appeared in the sky, twinkling over the quiet ranch, Jacob and Emma reflected on the journey they had shared. They thought of the storm, the rising river, the danger that had tested them, and the strength they had discovered within themselves. It had been exhausting, frightening, and challenging, but it had also been a moment of growth, connection, and triumph. Jacob stood and looked over the fields, the river, and the barns. He felt a quiet pride in what they had accomplished, but he also felt gratitude for having faced the challenge with someone as capable, brave, and determined as Emma. She had reminded him of the importance of action, courage, and hope, and he knew that the lessons of this day would stay with him forever. Emma rose beside him, feeling the same sense of gratitude and strength. She had learned that fear could be faced, that history could be changed through determination, and that support and teamwork could make the impossible possible. She looked at the ranch, at the animals, and at Jacob, realizing that today had been a turning point, not just for the land and the river, but for herself as well. The night deepened and the ranch lay quiet under a canopy of stars. The river flowed steadily, the animals slept peacefully, and the fields were calm once more. Jacob and Emma sat together on the porch swing, sharing a moment of silence, reflecting on the challenges they had overcome and the hope they had found. Emma leaned her head on Jacob's shoulder, feeling the warmth and security of the moment. "We faced it," she whispered. "We didn't let it happen again, and we learned we're stronger than we thought. Today has proven that fear can be overcome, that action and determination can change outcomes, and that hope is always worth holding on to." But it had also shown them the strength within themselves, the value of working together, and the resilience of the human spirit. And so, the ranch rested under the night sky, peaceful and safe once more. The river flowed calmly, the animals slept soundly, and the fields were still and quiet. Jacob and Emma, tired but unbroken, had faced fear, protected the land, and discovered their own strength. They had written a new chapter, one of courage, hope, and triumph, and while challenges would surely come again, they were ready to meet them together. In that quiet moment, with the stars above and the gentle hum of life around them, both Jacob and Emma understood that the storm had not just tested the ranch, it had tested them. And in facing it, they had grown, learned, and emerged stronger, prepared to face whatever future storms might come their way.